Evelyn stands alone in that rotting farmhouse, the wind screaming through the broken windows, the floorboards trembling beneath her feet as if something alive is crawling underneath. And then, from the far end of the dark hallway, she hears it. A voice that isn't a voice. A whisper that doesn't belong to anything human. "You shouldn't have come back, Evelyn." The lights die. The air freezes. And in the glow of her flickering lantern, she finally sees them. The shadows moving on their own, bending, twisting, forming the shape of the thing that has been waiting for her since childhood. And before she can scream, it speaks again. "You opened the door. Now you belong to us." What really happened in that farmhouse? Why did Evelyn's family flee in terror decades ago? And what ancient darkness has been waiting, patiently, for her return? The Elk River had always been a quiet place after sundown, a stretch of dark water winding between the Appalachian ridges like a long, sleeping creature. At night, the fog slid down from the hills, curling low over the river until the whole valley was drowned in a milky haze. Folks around the tiny West Virginia town used to joke that the fog carried whispers, old voices of the mountains, voices that had never quite learned how to rest. But Lindsay had never paid much attention to such tales. For more than 40 years, he'd ferried people across the narrow bend of the Elk River, night after night, in all kinds of weather. He knew the river better than he knew his own breath. He knew its currents, its moods, the way its surface could lie still as glass one moment and churn like boiling tar the next. And he knew every kind of passenger imaginable: drunk lumber workers, runaway teens, tired mothers carrying groceries, hunters returning late from the woods, even the occasional stranger drifting through town. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he believed. It was late autumn, the kind of night where the cold sinks deep into your bones, even before you've stepped onto the river. Lindsay had finished tying up the last lantern, checking it twice to make sure the wind wouldn't smother the flame. The fog had rolled in unusually thick that evening, swallowing the opposite bank entirely. Even the moon was just a dull smear in the clouds overhead. He muttered to himself as he checked the ropes. "Fog's heavier than usual. Ain't gonna make for an easy crossing tonight." That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, tapping lightly on the old wooden boards of the dock. Slow, uneven, almost hesitant, like someone wasn't sure if they should keep walking. Lindsay turned around, expecting to see a regular, someone late after work or maybe a local teen sneaking back home. But what he saw made him grip the ferry railing a little too tight. A young girl stood at the far end of the dock. Thin, small, maybe early 20s, though the shadows made it hard to guess. Her long dark hair clung to her cheeks as if soaking wet, and her clothes hung limp against her body, as though she'd just walked straight out of the river itself. The lantern light flickered across her skin, revealing a pale, bluish tint, the kind of pallor you only see on someone who's been cold for far too long. Lindsay cleared his throat, trying to sound normal. "Evening, miss. Need a ride across?" The girl didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she slowly lifted her head, the hair sliding off her face like a heavy curtain, revealing eyes that shimmered strangely in the dim light. They were dark, too dark, and deep, like they were focused on something far behind him instead of the man standing in front of her. She opened her mouth just slightly. "I need to go home," she whispered. Her voice wasn't normal. It sounded distant, hollow, as though it was traveling from a long, long way off. It echoed faintly against the fog, bouncing oddly across the water. Lindsay rubbed the back of his neck, unsettled. "Well, if you're crossing, come on then. $2 for the trip." She moved, but not the way most people do. Her steps were strangely light, almost gliding. Her feet barely made a sound on the dock as she approached the ferry. And when she finally stepped aboard, the ferry rocked just a little, less than it should have for someone her size. She walked straight to the mists at the front of the ferry, staring out into the river as if waiting for something to rise from the water. Lindsay called out again, "Miss?" The fare. Still nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't have money," she whispered. "But Mama will pay you. Tomorrow night." "Tomorrow?" Lindsay frowned. "I don't reckon I've seen you round here before. You from town?" No answer. Just that same stillness. That same eerie, distant breathing. He tried again, clearing his throat. "What's your name, miss? Folks don't usually cross this late unless—" "Lindsay." He froze. The girl hadn't turned around. She hadn't even moved. But she had spoken his name. Not his given name. Not Mr. Not Sir. She said Lindsay, the nickname only people born and raised in that town ever used. Outsiders didn't know it. Strangers never heard it. Lindsay felt a cold shiver slide down his spine. "Who told you my name?" he whispered. The girl didn't speak again. The river did all the talking now. Soft waves slapping against the ferry's wooden sides, the creaking of the old planks beneath their feet, and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere deep in the forest. The fog grew thicker the farther they traveled from shore. Soon, the world around them became nothing but white, like they were drifting through a dream. Or a grave. When they reached the opposite bank, Lindsay secured the ferry rope and turned to tell the girl they had arrived. But she was already walking away. He hadn't heard her move, hadn't felt the ferry shift, hadn't sensed anything at all. She just appeared at the edge of the deck, stepping onto the dirt path leading into the pine forest. Her pace quickened, faster than natural, almost like she was gliding again. The mist curled around her legs, swallowing her whole. "Miss, wait!" Lindsay called out. But she was gone. Gone as though she had never been there at all. The only sound left was the quiet hum of the river. And in that silence, a cold truth settled deep inside him. Something about that girl wasn't right. Not at all. Lindsay barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the wooden ceiling of his small cabin, listening to the distant rumble of the Elk River, listening for footsteps that weren't there, breaths that weren't human, or that faint, haunting whisper of a girl who knew his name without ever asking. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the wet hair clinging to her cheeks, the pale, almost bluish skin, those deep, hollow eyes staring straight ahead into the fog. And every time he tried to convince himself she'd been a normal passenger, something deep inside him pushed back, a cold certainty telling him the truth he didn't want to consider. Something about her wasn't right. Not even close. When the first gray light of dawn crept over the Appalachians, Lindsay climbed out of bed and splashed cold water on his face. His hands were still shaking. The morning felt too quiet, unnaturally quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. He walked into town, boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting long purple shadows across the sleepy streets. Only one place was open at this hour, Harper's Cafe, a little corner shop with creaky floors, lukewarm coffee, and gossip thick enough to choke on. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Warm air hit him first, followed by the smell of fried eggs and old percolators. A few early patrons turned their heads, nodding in greeting. Lindsay nodded back, but his mind drifted as he slid into his usual booth near the window. Waitress Annie poured him a cup without asking. She knew his routine like clockwork. "Rough night?" she asked, noticing the bags under his eyes. "Something like that," Lindsay muttered. Before Annie could press further, the cafe door swung open again, and a gust of cold air blew in along with two men from the lumber mill, talking loud enough to shake the windows. "You hear about Martha's girl?" one of them said. The words hit Lindsay like a fist to the gut. He didn't move at first, just listened. "Terrible thing," the second man replied. "Police down in Tennessee said she'd been beat bad. Real bad. Then she tried to get away, jumped from the second-floor window. Didn't make it." Lindsay's coffee cup trembled in his hand. A few drops sloshed over the rim, burning the skin of his knuckles. But he didn't flinch. His mind was spinning. Martha's daughter, dead. In Tennessee. Last night. Annie leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "They're bringin' her body back tomorrow," she whispered. "Poor Martha, she's been sittin' on her porch all morning waitin' for someone to drive her down." The two lumber workers kept talking. Always knew that no good husband of hers would go too far one day. Heard she was tryin' to come home. Guess she never made it. A heavy silence settled over the cafe. Except inside Lindsay's skull, everything roared. His heartbeat hammered. His throat felt dry as dust. A cold sweat crawled down his back. He set the cup down, hands shaking so badly the porcelain clicked against the table. Annie frowned. "Lindsay, you all right?" I'm fine," he lied. He wasn't fine. He wasn't even close. Because no matter how he tried to explain it away, no matter how much logic he forced into his brain, there was no escaping the truth that wrapped cold fingers around his spine. He had ferried a girl across the river last night. A girl with dark, wet hair. A girl with a pale face and bruised skin. A girl who said her mother would pay his fare. And now he heard the townsfolk say Martha's daughter had died the night before. Not recently. Not early this morning. But last night. The same time he'd been out on that river. He tried to breathe, but the air felt thin. Maybe he had seen someone else. Maybe the girl on the ferry wasn't Martha's daughter at all, just someone who resembled her. Someone troubled. Someone lost. But deep down, he knew better. There had been something off about her. Something unnatural. Her voice. Her movement. The way the fog seemed to cling to her like she belonged to it. And then there was the worst part. He hadn't told her his name. Nobody had. Nobody was on the ferry with them. Yet she'd whispered it. Softly. Clearly. Like she'd been saying it her whole life. Lindsay. He wiped his face with both hands, trying to ground himself. Trying to hold onto something real. But the chatter around him only grew louder. "They're bringing the body home in a couple days," someone else added. "Probably cross the river at sunset. It's always been her favorite side of town." Sunset. The same hour the girl had boarded his ferry. Lindsay's stomach twisted. The room felt smaller, like the walls were creeping in. He pushed away from the table and stood up abruptly. You talking off already? Annie asked. Need some air, he muttered, barely hearing his own voice. When he stepped outside, the cold morning wind slapped him across the face. Sharp, waking, but not enough to chase away the dread settling inside him like a stone. He staggered toward the riverbank, the place where he'd tied up the ferry only hours before. The fog still clung low to the water, swirling gently as though waiting for him. Lindsay's breath trembled in the cold air. He stared into the mist, and for a split second, he thought he saw a shape, a figure, small, thin, hair dripping wet, standing at the edge of the dock. Watching him, he blinked, hard. The figure dissolved into fog. His knees weakened. The river whispered softly against the rocks, just like it always had. But today, that sound felt different. Intentional, like it was trying to say something, trying to call him back. And in that moment, a realization struck him so sharply it felt like a blow. If the girl he'd ferried last night was truly Martha's daughter, then she hadn't crossed the river looking for a ride. She had come for something else. To deliver a warning. To deliver a message. Or perhaps, to ask for help. Lindsay stepped back from the water's edge. His heart pounded hard enough to echo. Something was coming. Something tied to that girl. Something tied to the river itself. He felt it, and deep down, he knew the night wasn't finished with him yet. Not by a long shot. The second night came quietly, the way nights in Appalachia usually do. The mountains were wrapped in blue mist, the kind that settles low and thick like a blanket meant to smother sound itself. The river, cold, ancient, endlessly murmuring, flowed darker than ink beneath the old wooden planks of the Elk River ferry. And Lindsay, the ferryman who had crossed this water for more than 4 decades, stood with his lantern lowered, staring into the fog as if it were staring back. He didn't expect her to return. He didn't want her to return. But deep down, he already knew she would. The strange girl, the one with the quiet voice, the one who moved too fast, too lightly, like her feet barely touched the ground, the one who shouldn't have known his nickname. He kept telling himself he was being paranoid, that maybe she was just a runaway with manners shaped by some long-gone southern upbringing. But the air on the river tonight felt different, colder, heavier, almost reluctant to move. Even the crickets that usually sang loud and constant had gone mute, as if they, too, were waiting for something unwelcome. Lindsay felt a tightness in his chest, a warning, a memory, a fear he didn't have a name for. He lifted the lantern and checked the shoreline. No sign of passengers. The ferry should remain empty tonight. Few people crossed the river at this hour anyway. But her voice from the previous night echoed in his ears, steady and oddly hollow. My mother will pay you tomorrow. I promise. He swallowed hard. Tomorrow had arrived, and no mother had shown up. He looked at his watch. 7:56 p.m. The exact time she appeared the night before. Don't be ridiculous, he muttered to himself. No one's comin' tonight. She was just a confused kid. That's all. But the river had its own way of silencing lies. Because at exactly 8:00 p.m., the fog parted, and she stepped out. Lindsay's breath left his body in a sharp, involuntary gasp. She wasn't walking from the road like a normal person. She was simply there, as if the fog had shaped itself into her outline and then hardened into flesh. Her clothes were the same as the previous night, a pale dress, almost too thin for the cold, drifting around her legs like it had a life of its own. Her long dark hair hung wet against her shoulders, though the air was dry. And her face was tilted downward, hidden behind strands of soaking hair. She stood at the edge of the ferry, still, silent, waiting. Lindsay's hands trembled so badly the lantern shook in his grip. "Evelyn," he said, though he couldn't hear his own voice over the pounding of his heart. "You, need a ride again?" The girl lifted her head just slightly, not enough to reveal her eyes, only enough to show the curve of a cheek, impossibly pale, almost translucent under the lantern glow. "Yes," she whispered. That voice, soft, flat, empty, as if it wasn't coming from her mouth, but from the air around her. Lindsay stepped back automatically as she boarded the ferry. She moved the same way as before, floating more than walking. No footsteps, no sound of shoes on wood, nothing, just silence. He swallowed and secured the ropes with shaky hands. "So, your mother didn't come by today," he said carefully, trying to sound like he wasn't terrified. "Thought she would." The girl didn't answer. She went to the exact same spot as the night before, the far edge of the ferry, facing the water, motionless as a statue. The wind slid through her hair, but her body didn't sway at all. Lindsay's throat tightened. He wanted to turn the ferry around and run. He wanted to jump into the river and swim home if he had to, but he couldn't. He'd been raised in this town. He had ferried families for decades. It wasn't in his blood to abandon a passenger, living or otherwise. "All right," he murmured, pushing the old pole into the water. "Just a normal night, Linz. Ain't nothing here you ain't seen before. People are strange. That's all." But he knew he was lying to himself. Because when the ferry drifted into the middle of the river, the girl finally spoke. "My body will be here soon." Lindsay froze. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "My body," she repeated, still without turning. "They're bringing it back home, across this river, in a wooden box." Lindsay felt a jolt of cold flash across his spine. His lungs refused to expand. His fingers numbed, slipping from the pole for a moment before he caught it again. That's not funny, kid," he said, voice cracking. "Don't talk like that." The girl tilted her head slightly, as if listening to the wind, or to something he couldn't hear. "It isn't a joke." "Then what are you saying?" Lindsay whispered. She finally turned her face toward him. Slowly, too slowly, like her neck had forgotten how to move. And when her face aligned with his lantern light, the breath in Lindsay's chest turned to stone. Her skin wasn't just pale. It was gray, a soft, bruised shade that clung to her cheekbones like the shadow of drowning. Her lips were colorless. Her eyes, barely open, reflected nothing. Not the lantern glow, not the moon, not the world. They were the eyes of someone who had been gone for longer than one night. Lindsay staggered backward. "Oh Lord," he whispered. "Dear Lord." She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't breathe. She simply said, in that flat, distant voice, "Please take me across again, Mr. Lindsay. I need to go home." The ferry jolted suddenly, a current hitting harder than normal, and Lindsay nearly lost his footing. He grabbed the railing, panting, trying to steady himself. When he looked back toward her, she was standing inches from him. He hadn't heard her move. Not a sound. Not even a shift in the boards beneath her feet. Her lifeless eyes stared directly into his. "Please," she whispered. "I won't be here much longer." Lindsay's voice trembled. "Wj, what do you mean you won't be here much longer?" But the girl drifted backward, returning to her place at the edge of the ferry, facing the water. The river carried them in silence until they reached the far bank. She stepped off without a word, just like the night before. But this time, she paused at the shoreline, turned her head, and said, "They'll bring me back the day after tomorrow. A beat, and I need you to take me home." Then she vanished, her figure thinning into the fog, dissolving like smoke, leaving Lindsay trembling alone on the ferry, as the Elk River whispered under a moon that suddenly felt far, far too cold. Morning sunlight crawled slowly across the Appalachia Hills, warming the rooftops of the quiet little town that lay beside the Elk River. But inside Lindsay's house, warmth didn't reach very far. It couldn't. Not after what he'd seen the night before. Not after the dead girl had come back for a second ferry ride. He brewed coffee with trembling hands, spilling some on the counter. His Labrador, Duke, sensed his unease and paced anxiously around the kitchen, whining every few seconds. Normally Lindsay would laugh, scratch the dog behind the ears, maybe put a little bacon in his bowl to calm him down. But today he didn't have anything left inside him that resembled laughter. Lindsay sat at the kitchen table, holding the warm mug with both hands just to stop his fingers from shaking. He hadn't slept, not even for a minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. The girl's gray skin. The way she moved without sound. The way she knew things she shouldn't know. And worst of all, the way she looked at him. Not angry, not sad, just empty, hollow, like someone waiting for something inevitable. He rubbed his palms over his eyes, exhaling shakily. "They'll bring me back the day after tomorrow." The words echoed in his mind like the toll of an old church bell. He didn't want to believe her, but he already did. By noon, the whole town seemed to be holding its breath. The air felt heavy, as if the mountains themselves were looming closer, listening. People whispered in the diner, conveyed rumors outside the gas station, exchanged nervous glances at the general store. They all knew the story by now. News spreads fast in Appalachia, especially bad news. They knew about the girl from West Virginia who died so far from home. They knew her mother, Martha, was preparing to receive the body. They knew the funeral was soon. But nobody knew what Lindsay knew. Nobody knew she'd already crossed the river twice. Walking, breathing, speaking. Nobody but him had seen her standing in the fog with the moon glowing behind her like a halo made for the wrong kind of angel. He kept that to himself. At least for now. That afternoon, right as the sun began lowering behind the ridges, a knock sounded at Lindsay's door. Duke barked sharply, tail stiff, ears pinned back in fear instead of excitement. Lindsay's stomach tightened. He forced himself to stand and open the door. It was Martha. Her eyes were swollen, red from days of crying, but her posture remained strong, the type of strength only Appalachian mothers seemed to possess. She held a folded handkerchief in one hand and a casserole dish in the other. because grief in small towns always traveled with food. "Lindsay," she said softly, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced." "You're always welcome here, Martha," he said, though his voice cracked on the last word. She stepped inside and placed the casserole on the table. Duke sniffed it but didn't wag his tail. He backed away instead, still unsettled. Martha took a long breath and looked at Lindsay with a mixture of sorrow and need. "I came to ask if you'll ferry her across," she said. Lindsay felt the room tilt. His fingers tightened around the back of the chair. "Ferry who?" She swallowed. "My baby. My little girl." Her voice broke. "They're bringing her home tomorrow evening. The procession will come down the mountain road around 6. And we'll need to cross the elk to take her to the churchyard." She paused. "You've always taken our family across, since before she was born." Lindsay felt sweat rise along his spine. I don't know if I can do that, Martha." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "You're the only one I trust with this, Lindsay. And she deserves someone kind, someone who knew her when she was little." Lindsay closed his eyes. "My body will be here soon." The girl's voice echoed through him like a cold wind through a broken window. He opened his eyes again and saw Martha's face, the grief, the hope, the weight of a mother burying her child. He couldn't say no. He never could. "I'll do it," he whispered. Martha burst into tears and hugged him tightly, whispering thank yous into his shoulder. But Lindsay didn't return the hug. His arms hung at his sides, heavy as iron. Because he knew what he agreed to wasn't a simple ferry ride. It was something else. Something deeper. Something colder. That night he walked down to the river to check the ferry lines. The sky was unusually still. No wind, no crickets, nothing but the soft murmuring of the Elk River drifting between the mountains like a restless spirit. He stepped onto the ferry, boards creaking under his boots. The lantern swayed slightly, casting distorted shadows across the water. He checked the ropes, checked the rails, checked the pole, but something felt wrong. He could feel it, a presence, not seen, but absolutely felt. "Who's there?" he called into the fog. Silence answered him. He swallowed hard. "I said whose?" A splash cut him off. Not small, not like a fish, like something falling from height. Something heavy. He stepped toward the edge and held the lantern outward. The water rippled, slowly, expanding in perfect circles. Nothing surfaced. Lindsay's breath hitched. He began backing away, step by step, until his heel hit the railing. He gripped the lantern tighter, knuckles white. The fog thickened, rolled in from the water like a living thing, like fingers reaching, and then a voice, soft, familiar, wrong. "Mr. Lindsay." He froze. The voice came from behind him, slowly, against every instinct screaming for him to run. He turned. She stood at the far end of the ferry, the dead girl. Her hair hung limp and soaked. Her eyes were dark pits reflecting nothing. Her skin was colder than moonlight. "You came early," she whispered. "Thank you." Lindsay couldn't breathe. I'm not supposed to ferry you tonight," he choked out. "They're bringing your body tomorrow." She tilted her head, the movement jerky, unnatural. "Yes," she said. "They are." A pause. A long, dreadful pause. "But I needed to see you first." Lindsay stumbled backward, breath shaking, heart pounding in his throat. "Why?" he whispered. She stepped forward. One slow step. Then another. With each step she took, the lantern dimmed, as if the very light feared her presence. "To make sure," she said softly, "that you wouldn't leave me." The ferry shook as if something massive moved beneath it. The ropes groaned. The water churned. Lindsay grabbed the railing to steady himself. "Please," the girl whispered, voice hollow and echoing. "Don't abandon me tomorrow." A gust of freezing air blasted across the deck, and when Lindsay opened his eyes, she was gone. No footsteps. No splash, no sound, only fog, and the faint, distant echo of her voice fading into the mountains. "Don't leave me." The next evening arrived with a heaviness that seemed to seep out of the mountains themselves. Clouds hung low like a curtain drawn too close to the earth, smothering the sky in a dull gray glow. The sound of cars rolling slowly down the old mountain road signaled the beginning of the funeral procession. Lindsay stood by the riverbank, staring across the Elk River as if expecting it to turn dark red at any moment. He had ferried many things in his life: men, women, livestock, even a few secrets best forgotten, but never a coffin. Never the body of someone who had already crossed his ferry twice. Never someone who spoke to him from the fog with a voice colder than the river itself. Duke stayed behind at the house, refusing to come near the river that morning. The dog had whined, growled at the doorway, and backed away with his tail tucked tight. Lindsay didn't force him. Maybe Duke knew more about spirits than people gave animals credit for. Maybe he sensed what Lindsay already suspected. Tonight wasn't going to be a normal crossing. Not even close. He swallowed hard as the first car stopped at the river's edge. People stepped out quietly, heads bowed, dressed in dark coats and heavy boots. The undertaker followed behind, driving a small van that held the coffin in the back. Martha stepped out as well, supported by two neighbors. Her face looked drained, almost translucent, as if grief had carved something out of her that would never grow back. "Lindsay," she whispered when she reached him. "Thank you for doing this." He managed a nod, though his throat was so tight it barely let air through. "It's all right," he said softly. "We'll get her home." Martha squeezed his arm, her hand cold despite the coat she wore. "She always liked you, you know. She used to wave at you from the riverbank when she was little. You'd blow the horn for her." Lindsay felt something twist painfully inside his chest. "Yeah," he whispered. "I remember." They loaded the coffin onto the ferry with slow, careful movements. The wood was dark, polished smoothly, and tied with a pale green ribbon, the same shade of green as the girl's dress the night she first appeared. Lindsay stared at that ribbon for a long moment. He had seen it before. Not on the coffin. Not in the undertaker's hands. But in the paper bag Martha had received from the bakery. The one the dead girl had left behind instead of money. That was the moment Lindsay knew. She had been haunting them long before she ever stepped onto his ferry. The day went colder as he untied the ropes. The sky seemed to hold its breath. Even the river slowed, as if waiting for something sacred or cursed. The ferry began to move. One push of the pole, then another. Slow, heavy, reluctant. People stood silently behind him. Some prayed, some cried, Some just stared down at the coffin with eyes wide, unblinking, unsure of what to feel. Halfway across the river, the fog crept in. Not normal fog. Not the soft, natural mist that drifted down the mountains every evening. This fog rose straight up from the surface of the water, cold, thick, and eerily fast, swallowing the ferry until the far shore disappeared entirely. Someone whispered, "Lord, help us." And then, a loud thud shook the ferry. People gasped. A woman choked on her breath. Martha grabbed the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Lindsay steadied himself and held up his lantern, scanning the fog. "Everyone stay calm," he said, though his own voice shook. "Probably just a current." Another thud, harder, underneath them, like something massive was moving beneath the ferry. Martha began to sob quietly. "Please, not now, not today." The lantern flickered, dimmed, went out. The ferry plunged into darkness. People screamed, "Stay where you are." Lindsay shouted, "Don't move. Everyone hold on." He scrambled to relight the lantern with shaking hands, but as the flame sparked and caught, casting a weak glow across the deck, he froze, because she was standing on the other end of the ferry. The girl, her hair dripping, her dress clinging to her as if soaked in river water, her skin the color of moonlit stone, her eyes two hollow shadows that swallowed the lantern light whole. Martha saw her and collapsed to her knees. "God, oh God." Lindsay's breath left his lungs in a single painful burst. The girl's voice drifted across the deck like wind through dead branches. "Thank you for bringing me home." She walked toward the coffin with slow, wet footsteps that did not disturb the fog. The closer she came, the colder the air became. People backed away, some crying, some paralyzed in terror. When she reached the coffin, she placed one hand gently on the lid. "I didn't want to cross alone," she whispered. Lindsay stepped forward involuntarily. "You didn't have to scare us," he said, his voice small, trembling. "You could have just asked." She turned her face toward him, slowly, painfully, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her eyes. Not anger, not malice, but loneliness. A deep, hollow loneliness. "I tried," she whispered. A pause. "And you came for me." The river surged beneath them, rocking the ferry violently. People grabbed rails, clung to one another. A chilling wail rose from the water, a sound that didn't belong to wind or current, but something older, something grieving, something drawn to her. The girl closed her eyes, leaned down, and pressed her forehead gently against the coffin. The fog thickened around her until she became almost a silhouette. "Take care of my mother," she murmured. And then, she dissolved. Not like a person stepping away. Not like someone fading into distance. She dissolved like smoke, like mist returning to the river, until nothing remained but silence, fog, and the faint scent of cold water. The ferry drifted the last stretch on its own. When they reached the far bank, the fog lifted. The river stilled. The air warmed. It was as if the elk itself had exhaled. Martha collapsed against the coffin, sobbing into her hands. Some neighbors carried her gently toward the churchyard. Others whispered prayers. But Lindsay remained on the ferry, motionless, staring at the spot where the girl had stood. He didn't know how long he stood there, Minutes, maybe hours, until the sun dipped below the ridges and Duke's distant barking called him home. That night, he locked the ferry for good, threw the key into the Elk River, and never worked another shift. But sometimes, on fog-heavy nights, people still claim they see a girl standing at the riverbank, her dress pale, her hair wet, her face turned toward the ferry that no longer runs, waiting for one more ride home.